Hello YouTube divers, this is Water Dive 122 and I want to welcome you all to another episode of Magic Metal Mondays. Today we are going to be back with another album review and oh boy, this is a good one. We're going to be talking about my favorite metal album of all time, Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 2 by Helloween. And the reason why I'm doing this today is because today is I think it's the 33rd anniversary of Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 2. I could be wrong. Yeah, it's 33rd. On this day, August 29th, 1988, Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 2 was released. And, oh my god, it is a freaking phenomenal album. As I've already mentioned, it's my favorite metal album of all time. I don't think any other metal album tops this one. It's just, I'm gonna explain why I love this album the way that I do when it in the review. So without further ado, let's get freaking started. So the lineup on this album, this is the final album to feature my favorite lineup of Helloween, which is Michael Kiske, Kai Hansen, Michael Weikath, Marcus Grosskopf, and Ingo Schwichtenberg. And I say the final one because after this album, Kai Hansen left the band, and of course we would get Pink Bubbles Go Ape and Chameleon, and all those albums. The rest of the history. But thankfully Kai Hansen is back in the band now, as I've already talked about with my self-titled album when I was talking about Helloween's self-titled album. On episode 20, you can go check that out if you want to. But we're going to get into one of their classics, and Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 2 is without a doubt a classic metal album. Not just power metal, but metal, period. This is an absolute staple within the metal community, and it's a really freaking good album. So, well, let's get right into it, shall we? So, the album opens up with this cool little 1-minute intro. I believe it's called Invitation, because on both their Keepers albums they had 2 dedicated intros. I think on part 1 you had Initiation, and then on part 2 was Invitation. It's easy to get those 2 intros mixed up because they both sound similar. And then right away after the intro on part 2, you got Eagle Fly Free, written by Michael Weikath. And do I really need to even explain Eagle Fly Free? It is one of the biggest metal anthems of all time, and it's one of Helloween's best songs, if not their best. But it isn't my favorite Helloween song, but it is up there, that's for sure. I've grown to absolutely love that song. Eagle Fly Free is a freaking staple. And then you got kind of like a downgrader. You have You Always Walk Alone written by Michael Kiske. It's not a terrible song by any means, but it's just kind of meh. I mean, I would probably say this is the weakest track on the record, but it's still good nonetheless. But maybe it should have been a bonus track. I don't know. It's kind of a weird song for this record. And then the next song is Rise and Fall, written by Michael Weikath. There's a lot of Michael Weikath stuff on this record. And I know a lot of Helloween fans are not too fond of Rise and Fall. I think it's pretty cool. It's personally one of my favorite songs on the record. I've talked about this album a lot, like in my Helloween rankings and my favorite albums of all time, my favorite metal albums. There's just a lot of videos on my channel where I've talked about Seven Keys Part 2. And I basically said that, Rise and Fall was one of the standout tracks for me, because, I think it's a very cool track, and it's interesting coming from a band like Helloween. And then, right after that, we got another Helloween classic written by Michael Weikath, Dr. Stein, which, in of its own self, is kind of weird, I guess. It's another one of my favorite tracks on the album. But, when I'm returning to this record, I'll basically listen to Dr. Stein if I choose to listen to part 2 in full, which I which I usually do from time to time. When I'm doing something that I need to listen to music. I think part two is one of those albums that I will definitely come back to because, as I said, it's my favorite metal album. And Dr. Stein is, of course, a classic. What more can I say? And then that follows it up with another track written by Michael Kiske, the final track written by Michael Kiske, which is we got the right, which is better than You Always Walk Alone, but I really like the beginning with that little triplet section. And the way Kiske sings it is just it's crazy. He does an absolutely amazing job. I really enjoy that song. But, it's an interesting song in of its own self, but, it's just one of those songs that I'm not likely to get back to when I'm listening to this record. And now we get into the very strong side of the album, the first of 3 tracks written by Kai Hansen, Save Us, which is amazing. I love that song, but, it's probably the one song on this album that I've listened to the least. But it's not my least favorite song on the record. It is probably my least favorite out of the 3 songs Kai Hansen wrote for this album. Because these next 2 songs that I'm gonna get into are just freaking killer. I mean, killer. So Save Us, for what it is, it's a good song. I definitely don't think it's the worst album, the worst song on this record, or the weakest song on this record. But in terms of the 3 songs that Kai Hansen wrote for this record, I do think it is the weakest that Hansen wrote for this album. But it's still a great song. And then moving on, we got March of Time, which is... Do I even need to talk about March of Time? That chorus, the way Michael Kiske sings that chorus is brilliant. And the songwriting, the instrumentation, everything is just crazy on that song. I love March of Time. It's probably one of my top 3 favorite songs on this record. It's a masterpiece. I love that song. And then we come to my favorite metal song of all time, not just by Helloween, but my favorite metal song ever. I Want Out. Final track on here written by Kai Hansen for this record. This song got me into Helloween. This song pretty much got me into power metal, and it kind of solidified Helloween being a band that I really wanted to check out. And of course, from some of their other stuff, it solidified me to becoming a big Helloween fan, and up until this present day. So there's not really much I can say about I Want Out. Like Eagle Fly Free, it is a metal classic. It's almost universally loved by not just Helloween fans, but by the heavy metal community as well. And then finally, the grand epic that ends this album, Keeper of the Seven Keys, written by Michael Wycath, which was interesting because I thought Kai Hansen wrote Keeper of the Seven Keys, but in preparation for this video, I was looking at the songwriters for this album, and it turns out that Michael Wycath wrote Keeper of the Seven Keys, which is kind of crazy because I always thought that it was Kai Hansen coming up with these grand epics. I mean, look at Skyfall, for instance, off of the new album. I always thought, Hansen was like the most intellectual of the Helloween songwriters, in my opinion. He was definitely their strongest songwriter. So I thought, Keeper of the Seven Keys was a Kai Hansen track, but no, it's a Michael Wycath track, which is crazy. But in my opinion, Michael Wycath's songwriting on this song is just crazy. I mean, Keeper of the Seven Keys is my second favorite song off the album. It's just it's a killer song. What a way to close off the record. And then I'm going to talk about one of the bonus tracks for this album, the song Savage, another song written by Michael Kiske, Um, which is almost kind of like a thrash metal track. Can you imagine that? Helloween being thrash metal? Crazy. But in my opinion, it should have been on the record. It is just so heavy, and I like thrash metal a lot. I mean, I got the entire Big Four in my top 10 bands of all time, so there's that. I really enjoy thrash, and maybe it should have been on the record, and maybe it should have swapped out places with "You Always Walk Along," "You Always Walk Alone," for example, because in my opinion, "You Always Walk Alone" is, in my opinion, the one track that I think Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 2 could have done without. But like I said, it's still a great track nonetheless. And so, with that out of the way, you got a solid batch of songs on this record. You have a lot of great vocal lines by Michael Kiske. The guitar duo of Kai Hansen and Michael Wyckoff is just A plus perfection. And did I mention the crazy bass tap solo on Eagle Fly Free from Marcus Grosskopf? That's crazy. Um, it's crazy. You don't hear a lot of bass solos in metal very often, and I think and I think Marcus Grosskopf is one of the most underrated metal bass players of all time. He's just a really great bass player. And the late Ingo Schwichtenberg on the drums, he definitely has his moments. He has a lot of memorable drum fills. It's just rest in peace, Ingo. It's This is just an amazing album. Amazing, amazing album. It's my favorite metal album of all time, and you know, happy 33rd birthday to Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 3. Part 2? Am I right? I almost said Part 3, but that's the legacy. That's Keeper of Seven Keys' legacy. We'll talk about that one in a future video, I guess. Um, but yeah, happy 33rd birthday to Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 2. All you Helloween fans out there, let's go listen to Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 2, because it's in celebration for today. Yeah! So, greatest metal album ever, in my opinion. Happy 33rd birthday, as I have already mentioned before. And please go listen to this classic if you haven't already, because trust me, you will be absolutely rewarded. And if you're just getting into power metal, think both the Keeper albums of Keeper Part 1, Keeper Part 2, and maybe even Keeper the Legacy. Just listen to those, either one of those 3 albums for your introduction to power metal, and you'll immediately get into it. It's a freaking amazing ride. So with that said, that concludes this review. I rate this album a solid, and I mean a solid, 10 out of freaking 10. Perfect album from top to bottom. This album's amazing. I love this one. So with that said, that concludes this edition of Magic Metal Mondays. Thank you so much for watching, my fellow YouTube divers. This is WaterDive122 signing out, ready to dive into more fun on YouTube. Thanks for watching.